This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Tyler. My guest today is Qin Sun Stubis. Qin is originally from China. She is joining us from the Washington, D.C. area right now. And Qin is a writer and author of a beautiful memoir called Once Our Lives, in which she writes about the history and struggles of her Chinese family. Qin, hello and welcome.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's my honor to be on your show. I listened to some of the previous interviews, and I'm in awe of these wonderful women and their mommies. And I just feel that this is a fantastic, precious podcast for any women, any girls who want to learn about being a woman. And one day they will become mommies themselves.
Thank you. Qin, tell me about Once Our Lives. How did you start and how long did it take you? This is such a big piece of work.
Actually, this book, Once Our Lives, is a book about 4 generations of Chinese women struggling against war, revolution, and an ancient Chinese superstition that taunted a family for nearly 100 years. The time I spent on this book was almost difficult to imagine. I spent 20 years working on this book. And actually, the book is very much something special that I wanted to write about my parents. When they passed away all the way in China, and I was all the way in America, I went and attended their funerals when my mother was sick with ovarian cancer. I went there a few times to spend a precious time with her, to be with her. But it was always hard because I had the young children. So when they passed away, my heart was broken. I literally was in a depression, a deep clinical depression. I would wake up and sit up in bed and cry. And when I was alone at home, my tears would just flow. And because my relationship with my mother was not an ordinary one. And when I was growing up, about 14 years of my life, I spent just with a mother, with no father. Mm-hmm. My father did not voluntarily run away. He was jailed. He was imprisoned for 7 years from 1968 to about 1975. He spent most of that 7 years imprisoned for being against the Cultural Revolution. And then in 1982 to 1989, he was again imprisoned for being for Cultural Revolution. So I had a lot of time in my life that I didn't have a father. And also that was the hardest time, especially during the Cultural Revolution. I was 8 years old. He was imprisoned. My mother had 4 little girls, and I was the second. So I saw firsthand in a situation it was almost impossible to continue our lives. The only line between me and the death, starvation and death, was my mother. She was there. As long as she was there, I felt that we would be okay. We had no income because my father was imprisoned and was not working. My mother was a housewife, so she didn't have any income. So how to live a life with 4 little girls, it was impossible. We had relatives. We had a lot of relatives. My father had 5 sisters and 1 brother and parents. But we were being abandoned by the relatives, by our friends, because they did not want to have anything to do with a family that was considered to be the underdog. It was considered to be anti-revolution during the time of the revolution. My mother went to the pawn shop all the time and parted with her favorite things that she really kept them for memory. Little piece of jade lock, silver chopsticks, silver spoons, a handful of mahogany chopsticks, little cute, delicate lacquerware with decorations. She essentially had to part one piece at a time. In the end, she was selling like a piece of brocade, fabric, a piece of wool, a pound of wool yard, just so that she could trade them for a few dollars to buy us rice, so we won't go to bed empty stomached. And we were so poor, we couldn't eat the rice with just cook the rice. Usually it would be a handful of rice with tons of water in it.
Yeah.
And talking about poverty, that was poverty. Yeah. You don't get new clothes, your clothes you wear.
She made shoes. I read in the
She
book
made
how she
shoes.
made your own shoes.
Yes.
And how you children had to go outside and try to find little pieces of coal in the garbage to be able to cook. It was fascinating to read. But also, for me, it was interesting. When I went to school was a long time ago. It was interesting to repeat my Chinese history through your book. I think that made it very, very fascinating as well. And I would kindly ask you if we could together just quickly run the listeners through the history of China. I know it's a very complex and big country with a big history, but if we just say that it has been an empire for 2,000 years, and then in 1912, there was a revolution and it became a republic.
Yes.
And then you already mentioned in your book this struggle between the nationalists and the communists.
Yeah, it was essentially a civil war in China around the time of the World War, the Second World War, and also internally we were being attacked by the Japanese. So there was an anti-Japanese war. So you're thinking about there were like 3 wars going on in the country at the same time. So it was very, very hard. And the United States at the time was on the side of the nationalists. So the nationalists were given the Western weapons, but instead of fighting the Japanese, Americans told them to use the weapon, fight the Japanese, get them out of the country. But Chiang Kai-shek was really using the weapons to fight domestically, more working on the Civil War side. So it was a very complicated situation. So in 1949, also China at the time was also a colonial country. Yeah. Like Shanghai was occupied by like 13 countries. It was a treaty port. And that was signed during when China was still imperial times. So like Hong Kong was a treaty city for like 100 years until 1997. So yeah, there was a lot going on. But for the book that I wrote about 100 years of history, how ordinary people lived in extraordinary times in anything but ordinary times, it was about around the 1930s all the way to the 1990s and over. And what happened was in 1949, China was officially made into the People's Republic of China by Mao Zedong. And the nationalists essentially went to Taiwan and established itself in Taiwan. And my mother was born in 1932. It was during all these fightings and everything. She was born in a good family. My grandfather, she had 3 identities. So it's so complicated. If we talk about it, we need like 3 days to talk about 100 years of life. But at the time, her father, the new father, her adopted father, was the general manager of a watch and clock shop. And she had a lot, but she was always grieving for being a child, being a girl that was given away. We talk about the mothers and daughters, and how women were always really, if they gave away any children, it's the women. It's the girls that were being given away.
So her mother gave her away to a childless cousin, hoping that this will help the childless cousin to have her own children, which unfortunately didn't work. But your mother has struggled with this feeling of abandonment her whole life. I
The
just wanted to
entire
mention,
life.
when you mention
Yes.
a new father, this is what we're talking about. Let me ask you one thing before I wanted to ask very quickly about the Cultural Revolution, but before we go into that, has this negative attitude towards baby girls changed in the meantime in China? Because I was quite saddened reading your book. What a huge disappointment it was to have a baby girl.
It was, and especially for my mother, who was given away as a girl, and then she ended up having only girls,
Yeah,
four little girls. I
yeah.
have three sisters, and how she was being despised and looked upon by my father's family, because
Mm-hmm.
my father was the firstborn son, firstborn grandson. They expected my mother to have boys,
Mm,
and how all these burdens rested on women's shoulder. And when she did not produce any boys, and we were pretty much abandoned by my father's family. And then on top of that, there was the political side. My father was imprisoned for
mm,
anti-revolution. So our family essentially was an outcast. And my mother was, once she looked at me in the eyes when I was little, and she did not know what to do anymore, with no money, did not know where my father was, and we were just all alone. And she said to me with such a serious face, and she said, you know, that if we die of starvation right now and die in this house, in this yard, all by ourselves, she said, no one would ever know. They would never find out. And it struck me, being an 8-year-old child,
mm,
that I could die.
mm-hmm.
I,
Mm,
along with my mother, along with everyone, it was very, very devastating. But I learned the lesson of being a girl, how hard it was being a girl. I
mm-hmm.
saw it through my mother, through
Mm,
myself,
mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it was very, very hard.
Has this attitude in the Chinese society changed, that girls are bad luck or that they are useless?
Um, it has changed tremendously, especially in the city. I
Mm-hmm.
have friends who have only daughters, and they take the daughter to universities and give the daughters everything. But in the countryside, where people have less education, I believe they still do so. If they don't have a boy, they would keep on having girls until they have a boy. And the
Mm-hmm.
son was horrible for a period of time, I believe in the 80s, when sonogram is first introduced to the rural part of like abortion rates, because they tried to find whether or not they were carrying boys or
Mm,
girls. If they determined that they were carrying girls, they would abort the girls because they did not want to pay the fine. And so I think then they had to have new rules and regulations that like the fetus.
mm-hmm.
But yes, I believe that this deeply rooted tradition, that it would be
Mm-hmm.
always biased against girls because we don't carry out family names, and that they feel that through us the family line dies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jing, let's jump into talking about your mom. So we heard now about her life story. What have you learned from her? What do you feel are the most important lessons you've learned from her and her life?
The most important lesson that I have learned is about education. I think it hurt my mother horribly for being a girl, not allowed to go to school. my grandfather had enough money to give her gold watches, but he won't want her to sit with the boys and be able. She wasn't able to talk in public, like when there's a group of people. So throughout my life with her, she would always tell me to read an extra book, to study well. Like I could see that I was her, like fulfilling her dreams. It was not me studying school. It was her studying school.
Mm-hmm.
She saw the continuation of herself. And I felt it was the biggest lesson, the most important lesson, because what I listened to what she said to me and listened to her stories about her own life. I studied very, very hard. At one point, I was even the school librarian and reading books behind the counter when no one else was interested in books because it was a revolution time. The intellectuals were being criticized, and I was there. I was hiding behind the counter, volunteered to be a librarian, and I learned a lot. And it was through the self-education and the determination to learn well in school that got me into university in China. And then I became a tour guide, an English tour guide for the Americans. And during the college time, I really worked so hard. I kind of essentially read every book I could get hold of. But education was my card, my
Mm-hmm.
passport
Mm-hmm.
to
And it
leave
brought you
United
to.
leave. Yes, it brought me to the United States, and I ended up in the College of in Arizona, University of Arizona, where I studied communications and received my master's degree. So all these educational side paid off because I became a columnist for Santa Monica Star. I've been writing a newspaper column for the last 17 years. And so when my parents died, I decided that it was time that I need to shine a light to that part of the
Mm-hmm.
history in China. I didn't want my mother to die and disappear. I felt
Mm-hmm.
that she was a strong woman, very ordinary woman. And I felt there's so many women out there are as strong as she was. And if only they discover their inner strength. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
us do not know. Sometimes we feel like, what should we do? We're always in a disadvantage. We always have troubles in life, and you feel almost want to give up. You feel depressed. But I felt that they could have learned a lesson or two from what we went through. Four
Mm-hmm.
generations of women, what we went through, and as hard it was, natural disasters, wars, and
Yeah.
famines, and just the very reason that I was determined.
What would be the second lesson?
Well, I feel that sometimes we feel that we cannot continue our life anymore. I felt that, my gosh, it's just so hard. I cannot continue. But I feel that if you always find something that will be the strength, and then we can continue. And in our situation, I feel that the love for each other, and it was just such a tiny circle of people, four little girls and a mother. But we lived, we survived with nothingness, with an empty stomach, like freezing to death and scared of everything, but yet we lived. So I really felt that if only we could support each other, we could love each other and have faith in each other, just even with such a tiny circle of love. And it helped us to survive the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I also think what else that I learned from my mother, extremely important, is that when you're poor, everything is your resource. Your resources can be garbage. It could be your
Mm-hmm.
resources. We would eat a watermelon, and then my mother would a thinly slice off, trim off the teeth bite area, and then she would slice off the watermelon, the exterior hard layer, and then she would cut them into pieces. She would saute them, salted them, and then she would dry them, and she would make the watermelon rind pickles out of them. And we would have the clothes that were so worn, and then she would take out the worn part of the clothes, and then she would glue them on a piece of wooden board, and she would layer them like a jigsaw puzzle, layer after layer, like 6, 7 layers, and then she would let them go out and dry, and then she would trace the bottom of the shoe shapes onto them, and then she would sew them together to make up the soles of our shoes. She would cut the part of, broken sheets, the edge of the broken sheets, and she would cut them out to make the cloth diapers for our youngest sister. So there was always something.
Yeah. Are you very frugal now after all these experiences?
Oh, I am the queen of clearance. And I don't think I ever could have changed myself. I would go out and wear something. And my husband would look at me and say, "You look really nice." Now, he's an American man. He was born in the middle of Manhattan, went to private school, and had an education of Juilliard, and extremely romantic. He loves Chopin, so how romantic. And he said, "You look so good." And I would say, "Well, it was $6." And he's like, don't tell me. Yeah, don't tell me. Just tell me that you have to spend $500 on it. No, I don't see the bank account had anything to do with me. I would have never spent the money that was unnecessary. And I felt that I'd rather use the money to help the others. And because I would always remember at the time when we had nothing. I couldn't. Yeah. My kids, my son who is a PhD graduate, he's a doctor of mathematics. If there's a piece of rice on the table, he would have picked it up because I grew up telling them the story about how important rice was to me. So I think that the life of my entire family has been changed. If anyone would read my book, Once Our Lives, I'm sure you probably would be picking the rice and on the table as well.
Do you have any other lessons you'd like to share?
One thing I really, really felt lessons I never learned from my mother, that when I came to America, and when I had a life build a life with my husband, who's extremely optimistic, had a great life in a upper middle class life in America, he always tried to remind me, he said, "You don't take care of yourself enough. You're not pampering yourself enough." And then suddenly it just went back. I'm like, where did I get this? Where did I get this from? My mother. I mean, if there was a little food, she would have given everything to the children. If she had any money, she would have think about who would have need it except herself. So I remember when she was pregnant with my youngest sister, and she took out her winter outfit to serve as her blouse because none of the clothes could fit her anymore. So, and to the end of her life, she said when she was so sick she couldn't eat anymore, there was a tube on her neck, she was being fed, and she said she didn't have enough shredded cabbage and a pork. And that really made me sad because that was the most common dish growing up, was the shredded pork with cabbage. And that meant she tried to save everything, every morsel for ourselves. She did not take care of herself. So I really, really felt bad that I was too young to understand, and I was too young to take care of my mother. And that was my eternal regrets. So I always, people around me, I try to make sure they all take care of themselves.
But are you taking care of yourself? Mm.
I I think so. I think I'm taking care of myself as well as I can, and I have my little daughter and my son and my husband who are so caring for me. So I feel that I'm being pampered, which
Good.
my mother did not get, but I'm really getting pampered, and I really felt that it's very important for women to take care of themselves and be strong, so and then so they can take care of everyone else's. I'm not saying that when it is the last morsel of food, the mother would give the morsel to herself.
Mm.
That just seems to be impossible for us women to do. But I also felt that my mother was battling a lot of low self-esteem, which I was not aware of, and some sort of a depression as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that throughout her life, there was a sense of worthlessness inside her,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not from her, but everyone else fed to her, as that we see ourselves in the mirror. It's not ourselves that we're seeing, but everyone else is around us. The society is projecting an image of ourselves in that mirror. And I felt that the worthless of being a girl, being given away, which taunted and wounded her all her life. And having four girls, she was worried that we would follow her fate. So her only happiness is that none of the four girls followed her fate. We all got our bachelor's degree, got all the education she didn't. And the
Mm-hmm.
three of us got a master's degree,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think there are a lot of good things. And she was dying happy to see that our lives had been transformed and we didn't have to go through what she was going through. So now that I know all these things, I wish that as a little child, I would know all these things and I could help my mother more, which
Yes.
I did
Yeah.
not.
We always learn that too late, when it's too late, unfortunately. Well, looking
Yeah.
back, yeah.
Yeah, I feel that it's a generational, some sort of a punishment for being a human, because we all
Mm.
have to grow. Even the greatest man or a scoundrel of a man, they all have to come from a baby, and somewhere people around them and kind of affected them, and they ended to be great and strong, or they ended to be horrible. They're always
Mm.
affected by what's around them. As Confucius once said, 人之初性本善. When a human was first came to this world and he or she was kind. When we are born, we are all kind.
We.
Anything that became who we are today is
Mm.
the interaction of us with other people
Mm.
and in a society we are in. And of
Mm.
course, eventually, what we want to pursue, and we end up to be
Mm.
who we are today. So I think everything is important. And as a result of it, I think being a mother, you really, really have a holy responsibility
You do.
to transform the next generation. It's not about like, oh, do whatever you want, go and pursue your life.
Yeah.
It's more
Yeah.
like paying attention to see even the littlest crisis, see a
Mm.
little frown on your children's face, whether or not they're sharing with you a piece of good news, whether or not you are being attentive and listening and supportive. You'll be surprised how these little deeds eventually will form the personality, the character,
Mm.
the life of the next generation.
Mm.
So I
Mm.
really
Mm.
felt that Thank You Mama is a wonderful podcast that makes us to think about the holy responsibility of being a woman, being a mother. So I really, for that, I'm very, very grateful to be on this show and to share with you my story.
Thank you, Jean, so much. I'm very excited. You came and spoke to my listeners. I will put a link to your website where my listeners can find you and your book in the episode notes. And before we part our ways, let me quickly recap what we've learned from your beautiful Mom Yang. First, the power, I want to say not importance, but power of education to change lives and generations, I would say. I think with your educations and your sister's educations, this whole generational pattern has been changed and healed. Second is, you mentioned that we are stronger than we think we are. You were talking about how even when things look, there's no way out, there is always a way out. And you have to stay strong and find a way. For your mother, this was love she shared with you and your four sisters or three sisters. And then you talked about her being very resourceful and figuring out a way to survive when she was very, very poor. And that's always also a very important lesson to remember, that there's always a way. There's always a way to figure it out and survive and find a way out. And then, as something she was not able to teach you, you mentioned it's crazy how we hear about this from women from any different circumstances, countries, generations. We really have to learn to take care of ourselves.
Yes,
And we have to teach our daughters and new generations through our example, because this is what our mothers were not able to teach us. And then you spoke about low self-esteem, which is also partially comes from the outside influence and from what the society projects on us. But this is something we also have to work on with new generations and instill in them as their mothers. I think these were the most important lessons we covered.
yes, very much
Yes.
so.
Thank you again for being my guest.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider, that's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.